We are pleased to have you joining us again on Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome back. My name is Bjerga.
And I'm Gary.
So we do want to start off with a bit of an announcement. We have been talking, for those of you who have been listening for, many an episode, you know that we've been talking about this elusive book that we've been trying to write. So the problem is, when you get together every week to do a podcast, that often leaves a void in the opportunity to sit down and write. So we have come up with the idea of going up until episode 150 and then taking a pause from the podcast to make sure that the time that we normally get together to chat with you all, that we get to sit down and write.
That's an interesting challenge, and that just came to Birgit today, and she came in and announced that just before
I
the
asked
recording.
to see your thoughts.
And I got a chance to be curious and not judgmental on my own. And I am very curious about it. And I think that sometimes a mindset of a deadline or a mindset, a change in mindset is the key here. And I think that that's going to be a really good catalyst for that.
Yeah, I agree. And it just works out pretty well with the calendar. I honestly didn't even know when those weeks would line up. And so we did a little preliminary look at when our regularly scheduled taping times would fall. Takes us right up to the week before Christmas would be the last episode. And so I think that's naturally a good time to just put a pause, just because you and I both will have family activities, travel schedules, etc. So I think it's a very natural conclusion for now for the podcast to end with episode 150 and then give ourselves the permission to pick up after we've gotten the book done.
Does that mean we're doing a lame duck podcast now?
I don't think so. I think this has been a lot of the background work and the precursor to get the content on the page.
That's true. Well,
we were thinking about what to discuss today, and inevitably we have these things that happen in our lives, happen in our businesses and our families, which is the catalyst for the conversation week by week. And so one of the things I was thinking about on the drive over here, and every week I'm thinking, he always asks me a question, what do you want to talk about? So I'm always try to be prepared with an answer to that. But I was thinking about the differences between two words which really impact us deeply, which are accusations and authenticity. And those things maybe don't necessarily come into your mind in the same times, but I think they have a lot to do with one another and how we project ourselves externally to the world. And so wanted to start with kind of the leading question of, what happens when you've had someone levy an accusation against you, and then you have to carry on in relationship with them? How do you live authentically, is the word I'm trying to use, and can you?
It's very difficult for me. In my experience, if someone has accused me of something, especially if I feel wrongly accused, I am positive that I either consciously or unconsciously try to prove them wrong with my actions. If it's something that they're accusing me of that I don't want to be. And it's a fascinating topic, and we haven't touched on this because I know that I'm very sensitive to what people think of me and how people perceive me, and I want to be liked. I want less controversy in the world. I want everybody to get along. Of course, that's impossible, but as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can contribute, I want people to get along, and toward that end, I want to have influence on that. And so I want people to like me and like my values and respect me, all those words. And so if somebody accuses me of something, especially if I think, that's not me, then it really causes me to take stock. And I know that afterwards, I am probably less authentic for a time because I'm so worried about either bolstering or negating the accusation. So I think those two words go together really well.
Yeah. There's not been a ton of times, but there's been a few times in my life when someone has accused me of something that is just absolutely false. And how we got there is a whole nother discussion, and I don't even know that I've ever taken the time to deeply analyze how things got so off path that it ended up in this explosive moment. But the truth of the matter is it's happened, and it is so deeply hurtful. It is so deeply impactful to me, and it has absolutely changed the course of relationship moving forward. And depending on how that was handled by both the accuser and me, it may be a relationship that has to naturally part ways because safety has been lost or trust has been broken. But sometimes you've got key relationships that's not an option, so you have to figure a way around it. And especially when something is going on in the workplace, that's a tough one. We had a situation just this last week at work where one of our staff members had a situation where there was somebody else accusing this person of something that was false, utterly false, but the impact to her was devastating. The way that she was interacting with others was radically impacted. And so how do you move forward after accusation to step back into authenticity? And it's a tough one.
I hadn't even thought about that. It's not only, it's a three-dimensional problem because it's not only actions, as I was processing what you were saying, that would enforce or negate the accusation. It's also, if it strikes you to your core, you may be, it may affect your interactions with everybody just on a human to human level, and just like just debilitate you as far as being able to interact. I hadn't even thought about that. And in this day and age, accusations can be job threatening.
Oh, without question.
Yeah.
Well, you think about every celebrity that's been in the news over the last 2 or 3 years for accusations of sexual misconduct. And I think by and large, the public's response is, oh, well, there goes another one, right? Just the assumption is it's a true accusation for many of these, and we assume the worst, and we discontinue our support of them, or stop buying their music, or stop watching their movies, or whatever the situation may be. And I can imagine it's that little bit that I feel, but on steroids when you've got somebody in the public eye like that.
That's right. And that's a whole nother deal, and talking about people's personal brand and all that kind of stuff. But we all do walk around with a personal brand, don't we, in that regard? And so you don't have to, it doesn't have to be on TV to make it real. As a matter of fact, the TV stuff is probably more fake, and some of it's probably made up for publicity. But when it happens in the workplace, it can be devastating to the work environment. It can be devastating to individuals. It can be job threatening. It can be organizational effectiveness threatening. But, what's even worse is when it happens in a family, because as you said, there's situations where you can't give up on the situation. If there's trust lost, if there's even, like you said, a safety thing, if it's a family member, you kind of have to just deal with it. And no matter what it is, we don't want to pretend we know everybody's value systems, but for me, if it's family, then all bets are off. You have to do something to try to fix the situation. Even me as a non-confrontational person realize something's going to have to be done, right?
Yeah. I want to do a quick clarity point on this, that if there are issues involving sexual inappropriateness within family relationships, that absolutely has to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with thoroughly. That's not something that's like, oh, that's just, Uncle so-and-so. No, this is something that has to be dealt with. And, one of the key things that I think I am a big advocate for is if your child tells you something very serious in that realm, you believe them, right? And you deal with that situation. We're not talking about that level of broken trust. We're not talking about that level of accusation. We're talking about other things like, you always keep us from doing the fun stuff, or that kind of accusation. So I just want to make some clarity in that.
Or you always cheat when we're playing Uno.
Yeah, which, hopefully that's something you can brush off. But it is that level that we're getting into today.
No, that makes sense. And boy, you put your finger on one of the biggest accusations that, we're taught not to do, but we find ourselves doing anyway, and that's the always never. Right? You always do this, you never do this. Right. Which is usually not the case. Usually we're on a spectrum, we're on an analog scale, it's not digital, whereas we always do something, we never do something. But if I've done something that someone is accusing me of, I really have to analyze my behaviors and think, did I give that person reason to accuse me of that? and take that as feedback. Now, feedback is just that. You can choose to do something with it or not. You can ignore it. You can say, hey, let me take that on and try not to do behaviors that would help have people accuse me of that again. You could just write it off and say, well, that person accuses everybody of that, and I guess they're just like that. But we need to deal with it. And one of the old adages that I love on this one, which is kind of insightful, is we judge other people by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our motives. So sometimes people will do things and you confront them on it and they say, oh, well, I never meant to do that, or I never, well, but you did. Right? And so sometimes we think, well, that wasn't my motive. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't want that to happen. But the action might say to others that, yes, you did.
So then let's talk about some curious questions around accusations, right? So something's happened, somebody has said, you do this, or you don't do this, or this is what I see you as, that's your character, and it stings and it doesn't ring true to you. How do you deal with it? What are some of the beginning curious questions?
Well, I guess the first one to say is it true? Sometimes we are working on character defects, on problems that we have in our own lives, old patterns, old ways of thinking that we ourselves are working on. And sometimes that hurts because you're working on it and trying to make progress. And sometimes you find yourself thinking, well, okay, yes, but that's painful to me because I'm working on it. I'm so much better than I used to be. You should take that into account.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
But I guess the first question is it true?
Yeah. And are we a good judge of that when somebody external is saying something contrary to what we believe?
Especially if we don't think we're like that,
Yeah.
and we don't think that we did an action that would lead them to that conclusion. So the answer is a soft yes or no. In other words, my perception is it's true, or my perception is it's not true.
Yeah.
If it keeps happening with different people, you might have to question the perception, your self-perception of if it's true or not.
Sure, definitely.
I'm always thinking of American Idol.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a good singer. And then somebody gets out on stage and I'm going, these people had no one that loved them enough to say don't do
truth.
that.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's it's one of those things where you want to get feedback. Especially one of the things you could do is go to safe people in your life, people that you trust, and say, do you think I'm like that?
Yeah. Is this what you observe?
This could be a way to check our own perception.
No, I think that's really good. Thinking back to a really painful time in my own life where I had an accusation that was made that just was simply not true, there are going to be times where there is no convincing somebody otherwise. They have believed a motive that you have had, and there's no conversation that's going to get you out of it. And so I hope that doesn't happen in families, but I know enough to know that we have a very high number of people that have a rift in their families and have estranged relationships. And so I think this does happen in family settings, and how do we try to mitigate that as much as possible with maintaining a curious posture? When you are the one that has something really hard said to you that is false, how do you maintain that curiosity to at least do your part to try to preserve relationship?
Well, you just brought up something that I hadn't thought of before, and that is there's two levels to an accusation. There's the accusation of, and usually the always and never leads to this, but there's the accusation of the behavior, and then there's the accusation of the motive. Those are two very different things.
That's true.
I think sometimes, and I see it a lot in interactions, somebody says, hey, this, and then you go, what? No, that wasn't that. And they go, okay, I believe you. That wasn't your motivation, but you still did X. And so there's two levels.
Yeah,
so
right.
One is the behavior, and you say, okay, never mind. I didn't mean that. I apologize. That's not who I am. That's not my motivation. Okay, I believe you. I accept that. Let's watch that behavior. Then there's and this happens more in family because we've lived with someone long enough that we think we've perceived through the actions to the motives because we know that person so well. It's hard to look at someone on the street, although we do it every day, who's doing something and judge their whole character out of one action.
Happened to me today, pulling up to an intersection.
And I'm very bad at this with drivers, as we've talked about. But that's the thing. you don't have data over a preponderance of years
Yeah.
that says that, yeah, that's a pattern, that's a motivation, that's something that I could predict in any given situation based on those ideas, those motivations, this action. That's different than I'm calling out an action,
That's true.
even though I really don't believe that that's your motivation.
Yeah, no, you're right. Those are very different paths. And so, yeah, maybe two different conversations altogether.
But that's the way to stay curious.
Absolutely.
And as an accuser, wow, that action is interesting. Not sure I like that. What did you mean by that? So you can check and ask questions about what was that person's motive. Now, they may just barrel right over you and say, that is my motivation, and thank you for picking up on it. But it might be, oh, sorry, that was not my motivation at all. And then you can have a very good, curious conversation, which might save the relationship from going down a bad spiral into lack of trust and even into safety.
Yeah. So I want to come back around to the authenticity and how to live authentically after that type of an interaction, because it is a challenge. And, there's 3 or 4 specific examples that I can think of right now. And I'm going to obviously not share anybody else's story, but I mean, these are things that I've been witnessing over the last number of days. And so how do you come back from that place of feeling wounded, feeling hurt, especially if your motives have been questioned? And how do you re-engage in an authentic way? And can you? I mean, I think maybe that's the first one. Do you want to? And if you don't want to re-engage in authentic relationship, why? Is the wound so deep and the relationship is irrevocably damaged? Is that the right word? Or is it, what is the reasoning behind, yes, I'm willing to pursue reconciliation and live authentically, versus, no, that's it, I'm done?
Yeah, I mean, I can always speak for myself here, but I would say that, sometimes trying to repair a relationship like that might take a lot of work. And I may not be willing to put the work in depending on who that person is and where they are in my circles, right?
Yeah.
With family, work, community, church, whatever. If they're not in the right circle, then it's not worth the work to me, right? And again, I'm not a confrontational person, so if I've had a falling out with someone, it's like, fine.
Yeah.
Now, if I need to work with that person again, if I need to be a family member with that person again, well, then that's a different level of work I'm willing to put in.
Yeah, but I mean, using the coworker example, I can feel the discomfort, right? You've had this situation that's happened. There's been this accusation, and you have to get back in a room with them, a couple days later, and you don't feel like your authentic self. You do have your guard up. You do feel like, man, I am walking on eggshells and everything I say and do is being hyper evaluated. And so letting yourself be genuine to who you are, your personality, your characteristics, that is a hard one. And I don't know the curious questions to even begin to ask about how do you re-engage in that pattern of behavior after that type of an accusation.
Yeah, and I think you'll probably start filtering other interactions too and saying, okay, well, now that we've had this interaction, I can tell that person's treating me differently, which may or may not be true also. Right? So it's compounded. CJ on the West Wing, on a show I just saw last night, did that well. She had a few kind of mess ups, and I can't imagine that job, by the way, press secretary for the White House.
Oh, thank you.
But anyway, she had a couple of mess ups, very unintentional, not her motivation, obviously. And she was feeling a little bit on the outside, so she just went right in to the chief of staff and confronted it. And I thought, wow, that was cool. So, you have that expression, clear the air. Well, if the air is polluted by some of this stuff, maybe the curious thing is, how can I clear the air?
I like that.
How can I reapproach the room and say, whether it's several people or one person, and just say, hey, I'm feeling this. I don't know how we recover from this. Got any ideas? And get people on the same side of the table with you on solving the problem versus ignoring it's not there, the elephant's in the room, right? And just hoping it will go away, which, by the way, I resemble that remark.
Yeah. Well, no, I like that. Involving the other party and how do we resolve this? What are steps that we need to take in order to move this thing forward? And I think giving them that kind of comes into our conversation from last week or the week prior about asking somebody to help be the solution to the problem makes them feel more empowered.
And it helps them to see things more from your point of view, and it shows them that you're interested in solving the problem. I think a lot of rifts between people occur, and then there's not progress made in that rift, and it might even widen over time. They usually do, because the other person doesn't even think that there's an interest to solve the problem. So if you come to them and say, hey, I think this is getting in the way of our relationship. I think we need to have a relationship on some level. We don't have to be best friends. I hear this, right, in work situation.
Yeah.
Although I think being friends is a good thing. But anyway, we don't have to be best friends, but we do need to work together. What can we do to clear the air on this? Have I broken your trust irreparably? The word you just tried to say. It's a hard one. Or can we recover from this? And if they say, no, I think I don't trust you anymore. That's something. First of all, I'd rather know.
Sure, if somebody's willing to be that transparent.
And second of all, okay, then how do we rework our work relationship given that, so that we can both be effective in our roles?
Yeah, or are there steps that I can take to start to build trust back again?
Right? Yeah. Which is hard to do.
Yeah.
Covey's old, trust bank account, right? You can make several deposits. Only takes one bad withdrawal, right? And then it can clear the account. So how do you make those little deposits, and so anyway, we had a neighborhood situation recently where there was something that happened in the neighborhood, and I think a lot of people went out of their way to make some little deposits of things that have now healed everything, right? And
I'm glad to hear that.
but it's one of those things where if I'm going through life on my journey, you're going through life in your journey, and we kind of butt heads on something, whether it was intentional or not, we kind of have to get to a place where we can talk about that and say, okay, it has changed the relationship irrevocably.
Easy for us to say.
So what are we going to do from here?
Right.
Both of us.
Right. Now, I think those are great, curious questions to ask of ourselves and to ask of the person that there's been conflict with. And then, to begin to kind of do that internal work. I feel like I am not being my authentic self because of this rift in relationship. What do I need to do to kind of get recentered, restabilized in order to take some steps forward to kind of being back on the firm footing of who I am and engaging in genuine relationships? So, as always, there are endless questions that could probably ask around these two really important topics of authenticity and the accusations that may come your way. But always happy to hear your feedback. What are some of the things that maybe you have encountered or you have tried that have been healing in relationship after an accusation? And have there been some things that have crossed a line never to go back? Or have you been really intentional in looking for any small way to heal a divide? And what do those look like? So your comments are always welcome.
And if you've got a success story, we'd love to hear it too.
For sure.
Because that's the kind of stuff that's very useful after you've been thinking about something. And just, hey, 9 episodes left. Get your comments in now.
That's right. So as always, we are just grateful that you all have gone along for the journey with us through this very curious podcast, and we welcome anything that you want to share with us. You can do that at curiositynotjudgment.com, or you can comment on the YouTube page or any of the other audio platforms. So we'll catch up next week once again.
Take care.
Have a great week.